I received the divorce papers by email while I was still in a place where the sand stretched like an endless sea and the sky, burned white by the sun, scorched the eyes worse than red-hot steel. 13 years of marriage, 13 years of habits, dinners, arguments, reconciliations, holidays, and silent breakfasts were reduced to a PDF attachment. Concise, cold, soulless. My name is Nathan, and at the time I was 42 years old. I was serving as a staff sergeant in the 82nd Airborne Division, for months into a deployment in Kandahar, when Becky decided she was done waiting, done living the life of a soldier's wife, a role condemned to nothing more than the shadow of her husband's presence. The subject line read, "Let's be adults about this." Those words hit me harder than any burst of gunfire, because they carried no emotion, no regret, no hesitation, only a verdict. The body of the email was 3 sentences. She had already filed the paperwork. She had already drained our joint account. And finally, she had already moved her new boyfriend, Jeremy, into our home in Spokane. That was it. 3 sentences that erased years of life, plans, and every attempt to hold it all together. I read it twice, as if hoping some hidden meaning lay between the lines, something softer than the sterile legal tone. But there was nothing. I closed the laptop like sealing a coffin, walked to the showers, cramped stalls reeking of damp and bleach, rinsed off under icy water, put on my uniform and said nothing. I'd been trained too well to keep everything that could distract me locked away. That evening, back at my bunk, the silence pressed heavy. I sent her a single word. Understood. No arguments, no pleas, no threats. What can you say to a woman who's already decided? My bunkmate, Wilson, looked up from his book and studied me. "You good?" he asked in our clipped military shorthand. "Yeah," I answered. "Just something back home." He nodded and went back to reading. In the Army, you learn fast. If a man wants to talk, he'll talk. If he's silent, then it stays that way. The truth was, I wasn't even surprised. I felt it coming. 6 months before deployment, something had shifted. Not sudden, not loud, but like the faint cracking in the walls of an old house. The kind that starts small and ends in collapse. Becky stopped asking how I was, answered my calls with one-word replies, her voice flat as if stifling a yawn. She stayed late at the dental clinic where she worked the phones, came home past 9, signed up at a gym but never showed a drop of sweat. The new friends I never met, the clothes I hadn't bought, the locked phone with new passwords. They all told the story she wouldn't say aloud. I wasn't a suspicious man. I didn't check her messages, didn't stalk her, didn't start fights. That wasn't my nature. But I wasn't blind either. And so, long before Kandahar, I quietly prepared. I rented a storage unit across town and moved in my important papers, my birth certificate, our marriage license, the deed on the house that, thanks to a VA loan, was in my name, my benefits paperwork. I stored my grandfather's watch and my mother's silverware, things with weight, memory, roots. I also opened a separate bank account at another branch and funneled part of my pay there. Not much, just enough that, if the bottom fell out, I wouldn't be left standing with nothing but empty hands. The day I shipped out, the last time I saw her in person, she hugged me at the airport like someone fulfilling an obligation. "Take care of yourself, okay?" she said, her voice flat, her eyes dry, with no trace of worry or tenderness. It wasn't a wife saying goodbye to her husband heading into danger. It was a coworker shutting the door behind a neighbor. I should have seen it then. I should have admitted the obvious. But part of me still clung to the hope that maybe I was wrong. That it was fatigue, stress, coincidence. I was wrong. She didn't know that by then I was already prepared. She didn't understand that I wasn't the man who starts fights. I was the man who knows how to finish them. That's always been my nature. Silent, patient, gathering strength, striking only when doubt no longer exists. I met Becky in the summer of 2010 at a barbecue hosted by my old friend Jason in Spokane. I was home on leave between deployments. A brief slice of peace, a few weeks of normal life, where I could pretend the other world didn't exist. The world of sand, heat, shouting, and gunpowder. She was young, full of life, laughing too loudly, looking at the world as though the horizon stretched endlessly ahead. Becky was finishing nursing school but later decided to take a desk job at a dental clinic. Less stress, more order, she said. We started dating, and 8 months later she insisted it was time to marry. I agreed even though it felt rushed. Her energy, her determination, her certainty convinced me it was right. She often said she was proud of my service, but I could always see a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. Her family lived in a different world. Her father was a bank manager, her brother a pharmacist. A quiet, comfortable life with no risk, no loss, no blood. They had no soldiers among them, and to them my career seemed odd, temporary, something they hoped I would one day renounce for a real job. More than once, Becky asked me when I planned to leave the army, never understanding that after 15 years it wasn't just a job anymore. It was my life, my home, my place. In 2014, we bought a house. Nothing extraordinary, 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a quiet street where neighbors knew each other by name. But it was ours, and to me it meant far more than square footage and a mortgage. The VA loan was in my name, but I insisted that her name appear on the paperwork too. That's what a husband and wife do, I thought. That's what's right. My father died a year after our wedding. His heart gave out as he shoveled snow in the yard. My mother passed 3 years later, lung cancer, though she'd never touched a cigarette. They left me a little money, not a fortune, but enough to pay off Becky's student loans and build a small safety net. I thought it would strengthen our marriage, give us a sense of stability. Over the years, I deployed 4 times to Iraq and twice to Afghanistan. Each time I returned, Becky seemed a little more distant, a little colder. She smiled, welcomed me home, but her gestures felt mechanical, like she was playing a part that wore her down more with every performance. I didn't sign up to be a military wife, she told me once when I mentioned staying in for another 4 years. I'm tired of being alone all the time. I understood her exhaustion, but she didn't understand my choice. The army was the only place I felt necessary, where my work mattered. People depended on me, and I couldn't abandon them to sit in an office pushing paper. By 2019, the change was rapid. At first, in small ways. She grew annoyed when I called during her girls' nights. She laughed over stories of her friend Melissa, who had divorced and was now living her best life. More and more, she said, we no longer had anything in common. I suggested counseling, but she brushed it off. We're fine. It's just a phase. But after that phase came the late nights at work, the weekends with friends, new clothes I never saw in our closet, and a gym membership she barely used, though she carefully tended to her looks. I should have sat her down and confronted her then, but I never knew how. My father had taught me, think before you speak, be sure before you act. I listened, I observed, I held the silence inside me and prepared. Instinct in matters like these rarely fails. 2 weeks after that email about divorce, I was sitting in the dining hall when my phone buzzed. A notification from the banking app. Another withdrawal, $89,700. Nearly everything we had left. I set down my fork, opened the app, and saw the balance. $32.67. Our savings, years in the making, were gone. Murphy, one of the guys in my unit, caught a glimpse of my screen and my face. Bad news. I locked the phone. No, just account stuff. That evening, I called the bank from the phone center on base. I waited through the endless loop of the automated voice until finally a representative confirmed what I already suspected. Becky had been draining the account for weeks. Small amounts at first, then larger. The biggest transfers started the very day I shipped out to Kandahar. I hung up, stepped into the corridor, and stood there, watching life move around me. Guys laughing, someone showing pictures of his kids, another talking about his wife's call, another waiting on a package from home. Their lives kept flowing. Mine was burning down to ash. That was when Wilson found me. Alvarez glanced at me, then let out a tired, knowing laugh. "You look like you just saw a ghost over dinner." The words pierced me, not because they were clever, but because of the quiet pity behind them, the kind that comes too easily to men whose lives have long been shaped by other people's risks. Normally, I kept my wounds to myself. We weren't the kind of men who paraded them around. But that night Wilson pulled me out of a pit I hadn't realized I was sinking into, the moment I allowed myself to trust him. He didn't feed me empty platitudes, didn't offer cliches about finding someone better. He simply looked me in the eye and asked what my plan was. I gave him a short answer. He nodded and said, "Let me know if you need anything." But I knew I couldn't ask yet, because I didn't fully understand all the steps I'd need to take. That night I couldn't sleep. My thoughts churned, but it wasn't anger or despair. It was cold clarity, the kind honed by long experience. The textbook kind: act fast, act precise. I opened my laptop and logged remotely into our home security system. Becky must have forgotten I could still access the cameras. The screen filled with images that should have ignited rage, but I studied them without flinching. A stranger's truck in the driveway, an unfamiliar man wearing my old Seahawks hoodie, walking our dog and drinking from my coffee mug, and from the kitchen, laughter. Becky's laughter, light and carefree, as if she belonged to an entirely different life. What changed in me that night wasn't a furious desire to break everything into pieces, nor was it a sharp anger. It was something cold and clear. It was as if, over the years, an ability had developed in my armor to not give in to the noise, but to turn it into a plan. I closed the laptop, took out my phone and made a list. Call James, my old army buddy who became a lawyer. Check the terms of the Veteran Affairs loan. Contact the senior sergeant about emergency leave. Review the refinancing documents for the house Becky had once casually mentioned. Check the security of my military pension accounts. These weren't emotional impulses, but operation points, clear, concise, necessary. At 5 in the morning, before my shift started, I sent James a short, restrained, and urgent email with the subject, "Need legal help." The reply came quickly, within the hour, "Call me on a secure line." When I hung up, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I didn't need shouting, threats, or immediate confrontations. I needed time, observation, and to let the enemy's own actions create the same traps they had tried to set for me. 2 months later, I returned to American soil and remained out of sight. No call, no message, no warning. I got into my car, drove to a motel in downtown Spokane under a false name, because in matters like this, disguise is crucial, and contacted James. We arranged to meet at a diner 10 miles from the city, a neutral place where we could speak calmly and where no one would ask unnecessary questions. He sat across from me and said first, "You look awful." I gave a bitter smile and replied, "I think I agree with you." He laid a thick folder in front of me, and when I opened it, there were statements, document copies, seals, and what could become evidence of an unsettling truth. James looked at me as though he had already anticipated my next move and said, "I found something interesting when I dug into your finances." Inside the folder was a refinancing package with my signature, but that signature was a forgery. It wasn't the line I had on my driver's license, not the rounded stroke of my middle name, and the overall flow of the signature was missing details only I would instinctively write. The forgery wasn't expertly crafted, but it was rough enough to show someone had tried to bypass the system, but had done it clumsily. I asked, directly and without feigned surprise, "Becky," because I already knew the answer, but I needed to hear it aloud to place the fact in my internal catalog. James nodded and explained how, 3 months ago, they had arranged a loan for $330,000, secured against our house, even though the loan under the Veterans Affairs program was only in my name, meaning my signature was required. Someone who had forged it found a weak window and slipped through. They forged my signature, took out a large loan, added her boyfriend's name as a co-borrower, and then, step by step, emptied our accounts. James pointed out that the boyfriend, a guy named Hyun, had 2 DUI arrests and a 2019 fraud charge. Not an ideal accomplice for financial schemes, but all the worse for us. I sighed deeply and asked, "What are my options?" "Several," James replied. "But before we act, you need to decide what you want." I thought for a long moment and knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted what was legally mine, and I wanted her to understand the consequences of her actions. James smiled as though he already approved of the moral righteousness of my decision and said, "This is what we'll do tomorrow." The next morning, I drove past our house. Her boyfriend's truck was gone, but Becky's car was parked in the driveway, calm, as though nothing had happened. I parked at a distance and observed, for a long time without emotion, studying every detail, because my face-to-face moment was meaningless now. Instead of knocking on the door and causing a scene, I drove to the bank. There, I met with the loan officer who had handled the refinancing, showed him my military ID, my real signature on my driver's license, and the forged documents. His face went pale, like someone who had suddenly seen a snake under their desk. "I need to report this immediately," he said. "I understand," I replied. "I already filed a police report last night." And then came a message from Becky. "Who did you talk to at the bank?" "Jeremy says someone's asking questions." I didn't respond. The next day, I stayed silent too. I went to the county clerk's office and filed documents disputing the fraudulent refinancing. I also registered an official notice. No changes to the property could be made without my personal presence. This was the first step in a long chain of actions that lay ahead, and it gave me a feeling of solid ground beneath my feet. 2 days later, the phone rang. Becky appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through, "Nathan, we need to talk to the bank about the house." I called about the divorce. "We can discuss this like adults." The same cold, sharp words as in her email, distant, calculated, alien. I felt nothing. That same day, James called me back. His voice was businesslike, but I caught a hidden undertone. The news was serious. "The refinancing money has been frozen. But that's not all. Your wife's boyfriend was driving your truck, the one registered in your name. They pulled him over this morning. His license is suspended due to previous DUI charges. They confiscated the truck." I responded shortly, "Good." But James continued, "They found something in the truck, prescription pads from a dental clinic where Becky works. They weren't blank." I closed my eyes. So, she had been stealing prescription pads. This was no longer just a domestic argument, infidelity, or foolishness. This was a crime. The police had started an investigation. For a moment, I had the urge to call her, to warn her, but then I remembered the video. A strange man in my clothes in my house with my dog, and she was laughing next to him. That was it. There was no turning back. The next morning, I met with the fraud investigator from the bank. His name was Thompson, a short, tired man with bags under his eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He neatly spread the papers across the table and said, "This happens more often than you think. One spouse sees an opportunity and takes advantage of the other. But there's a problem." I asked, "What problem?" He explained, "We've frozen the funds from the fraudulent refinancing, but part of the money is already gone. Just over $14,000. I leaned in closer. "Where to?" Thompson hesitated. "I'm not supposed to disclose that." I clenched my teeth. "This is my house. My name was forged. My money was stolen." He nodded and turned the monitor toward me. On the screen, a list of transfers. The recipient's name, Daniel Spencer. Not Jeremy. Someone else. I frowned. "Who's Daniel Spencer?" Thompson shrugged. "Not my department, but your lawyer can subpoena these records." As soon as I left the bank, I called James. "Daniel Spencer," I said. He repeated it aloud, and I could hear that familiar analytical mechanism kick into gear in his voice. just like mine. Let me check. An hour later, he called back. Got it. Daniel Spencer is a real estate agent. Specializes in quick cash sales. The blow came suddenly. I felt it almost physically, like someone had punched me in the solar plexus. She was going to sell our house, I said. James confirmed. Looks like the transfers were down payments to speed up the listing. But listen further. Spencer worked with Jeremy Ryan, your rival. They've had 3 deals in the past 2 years. I sat on a bench in the park, feeling the world around me shift. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just a marriage broken under the weight of military years. This was an operation. James carefully added, I dug into Ryan. He has a scheme. He targets women going through divorces or military wives. I found 3 confirmed cases. Every time, the house was sold far below market value to Spencer's client. Ryan took a cut and disappeared. As for Becky, hard to say. Maybe she's a victim too. Or maybe an accomplice. I covered my face with my hands. Everything had changed. This was no longer about Becky and me. This was about military families like ours. Like my comrades in arms. They had been used, broken, and robbed too. What's next? I asked. I've already contacted the FBI, the Financial Crimes Division. This goes beyond the state level and involves veterans' loans. They're interested. That evening, I sat in a motel room, drinking cheap beer and thinking about everything. Had Jeremy been playing me from the start? Had Becky been manipulating me throughout our marriage? Or had she stepped into someone else's trap, not realizing how deep she had gone? And did it even matter anymore? My phone buzzed. A message. Nathan, please call me. The bank says something about fraud. And they arrested Jeremy for driving your truck. I don't understand what's going on. I stared at the screen for a long time, then typed my reply. Who is Daniel Spencer? 3 dots appeared on the screen. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. Then they disappeared again. Finally came the response. I don't know what you're talking about. I typed again. 14,600. Several transfers. She didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message. This isn't what you think. I turned off the phone and went to bed. The next morning, James called. The FBI wants to meet. They've been investigating Ryan and Spencer for several months. You're not the first, but maybe your case will give them the evidence they've been missing. For the first time since I received the divorce papers, I felt something like satisfaction. Not because my marriage had fallen apart, but because the truth was finally coming to the surface. I went to the local FBI office in Spokane. 2 agents, Patel and Donovan. They took my statement, made copies of all the documents James and I had gathered. Agent Patel said, your case helps establish a pattern. It shows intent by an organization. This is a conspiracy, not isolated incidents. And Becky? I asked. What about my ex-wife? The agents exchanged a look. Donovan responded cautiously. We're still determining her level of involvement. Has she ever mentioned financial difficulties? Pressure to sell the house? I closed my eyes, remembering. Yes, she often repeated that our house was too big, that we needed to downsize. For her, it sounded like a mantra. I hadn't seen the need for it. My payments covered the mortgage, we had no debt. Patel made a note in her notebook. When did this start? About 6 months ago, I said. That's probably when she met Jeremy. And she asked him never to discuss it with me. They asked more questions, clarified dates, names, and circumstances. Finally, Patel handed me a business card. We'll be in touch. But in the meantime, please avoid confrontation with your wife or Ryan. We need to build the case carefully. I nodded. But that evening, I found myself back in our neighborhood. I parked under the trees where I could see the house. Jeremy's truck was back in the driveway, apparently returned from the impound lot. Becky's car was nowhere to be seen. My phone buzzed. A message from her. We need to talk in person. Let's meet tomorrow at Riverfront Park. I showed the message to James over breakfast the next morning. He looked at me seriously. Don't go. Nothing good will come from talking to her now. I'm not going, I said. But I want to know what she's doing today while she thinks she's meeting with me. We drove to the house. 9:30 a.m. Parked across the street. At 9:45, Becky came out, got in her car, and indeed headed toward Riverfront Park. Well? James asked. Now we wait, I replied. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up. On the door, the logo of a real estate agency. Daniel Spencer. Jeremy came out to meet him. They talked right there in the driveway and went inside. Should we follow them? James asked. I shook my head. No need. I installed cameras during my last leave. Inside and outside. Everything uploads to the cloud. James looked at me surprised. You never said anything. Never had a reason to, I replied, taking out my phone. I opened the app. The screen split into 4 camera feeds. In the living room, Spencer was taking pictures, Jeremy pointing out details of the house. I switched on the sound. The listing should be ready by the end of the week, Spencer was saying. I've got a cash buyer lined up. Same as always. How much? Jeremy asked. She wants $420. We'll list at $470. Everyone's happy. And Becky's husband? Jeremy asked. He's making trouble. Spencer waved a hand. Military guys are all the same. They make noise, but they've got deployments, duties. He'll fold just to get it over with. I looked at James. He was already recording the conversation on his phone. I forwarded access to the camera feeds to Agent Patel with a short note. Happening right now. Half an hour later, FBI vehicles surrounded our house. From a distance, we watched agents lead Spencer and Jeremy out in handcuffs. My phone rang. It was Patel. We recorded them discussing the scheme, conspiracy, wire fraud, and attempted property sale under false pretenses. We'll need your formal statement. Of course, I said. And one more thing. Mr. Briggs, your wife just arrived. She's upset. I looked down the street. Becky was standing on the lawn, hands over her mouth, watching agents carry boxes of documents out of our home. What's going to happen to her? I asked. That depends, Patel said, on what she knew and on what you want. I looked at her for a long time. 13 years of marriage. There had been good years at the start before it turned into what it became. I just want justice, I said at last. The federal case moved quickly. Jeremy and Spencer took plea deals. They turned on each other and on several other associates. It came out that this was a network operating across 3 states, deliberately targeting military families. Becky claimed she knew nothing, that Jeremy had convinced her I was hiding money and planning to leave her with nothing. She said the refinancing had been his idea. She'd just gone along with it. Maybe that was true, maybe not. In the end, she agreed to a settlement. Full restitution of the stolen funds, waiver of any rights to the house or my military pension, and a signed admission about the forgery. In return, I didn't press charges. The divorce was finalized 6 months after that letter I'd received in Kandahar. And on the day the judge struck the gavel, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. On the day I signed the last papers, I felt a strange emptiness. Not joy, not sorrow, but a kind of cleared-out space inside, where new feelings hadn't yet moved in. I stepped out of the courthouse, took a deep breath of cold air, and that was when Agent Patel called. Jeremy Ryan was sentenced today to 8 years, she said without preamble. Fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Spencer got 12. Thought you'd want to know. Thank you, I said. There's something else, she continued. We found proof they'd pulled this with 11 other military families. Your case helped us map out the entire operation. Those families will be able to get their money back because of you. We said goodbye, and I sat for a long time on the porch of my rented apartment, watching the sun slowly sink behind the rooftops. I thought about those other men going off on deployments, believing their homes and families were safe, only to return to a void like mine. I hadn't planned to be the one to bring Jeremy down, to destroy his scheme with Spencer. I just wanted to get back what was mine. But sometimes things turn out differently. My phone buzzed again. A message from Becky. I never wanted it to end like this. I stared at the screen for several long seconds and hit delete. There was no reply to give. Nothing left between us worth saying. A year later, I sold the house. I couldn't live there anymore. Too many shadows, too many invisible wounds in those walls. I bought a small cabin outside Missoula, Montana. Just 2 bedrooms, but it came with 10 acres of land and a creek behind the house. And most importantly, no neighbors nearby. It was quiet, and that quiet didn't wound. It healed. I retired early. 20 years of service, enough. I'd given the army all I could. Now it was time to give something back to myself. I got a dog, a German shepherd named Scout, and every day began with his cheerful bark and walks through the woods. I started doing carpentry for locals, simple jobs, fixing gates, building shelves, making gazebos. Nothing special, but it kept my hands busy and my soul calm. The military pension covered the rest. Sometimes I thought about Becky, wondered where she ended up after it all. James once said he'd heard she'd gone back to her hometown in Oregon and gotten a job at another dental clinic. Started over. I realized I didn't hate her anymore. In fact, I didn't feel anything at all. She'd made her choices. I'd made mine. One evening, I got a letter. An envelope from Fort Worth, the handwriting feminine. Neat. Inside was a short note. My name is Sarah. My husband was in the Navy when Jeremy and Spencer tried to pull their scam on us. The FBI gave me your name. If you don't know me, know this. You saved our home. Thank you. You fought when you could have just walked away. I read it twice, then pinned it to my refrigerator with a magnet. On days when the silence grew too thick and the memories too sharp, I looked at those words and remembered. Something good had come out of all this. Last I checked with James, Jeremy was still inside. Spencer too. The system had worked this time. As for me, I kept walking my new path. Day by day, quietly, without extra words, building a life no one could steal, rewrite, or betray. A life that finally belonged only to me.